The USS Roosevelt cut through the dark waters of the Persian Gulf, its massive hull slicing the sea with quiet determination. On the bridge, Rear Admiral Catherine Kate Harrington stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. 14 ships under her command formed a protective ring around the aircraft carrier, the beating heart of the task force. The air smelled of salt and diesel mingling with the tension that hung like a physical presence. Incoming fast boats, Admiral. Iranian Revolutionary Guard. 12, no 14 vessels approaching from multiple vectors. Kate didn't flinch. At 42, she had the calm demeanor of someone who had spent more than half her life making decisions in moments like this. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection, but it was her eyes that commanded attention. Steel blue and calculating, constantly evaluating, never revealing the storm of analysis behind them. "They're attempting to box us in," she said, her voice steady, "trying to force us into the narrowest part of the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, the strategic choke point through which a third of the world's liquefied natural gas and almost 25% of global oil consumption pass daily. And today her ships were being shepherded into its jaws. Sir, intelligence reports indicate no aggressive intent. Standard harassment pattern." The intelligence officer's voice betrayed his nervousness despite the confident assessment. Kate's eyes narrowed slightly. Something felt wrong. The pattern wasn't standard. It was too coordinated, too precise. This wasn't harassment. This was a trap. "Sound general quarters." "Admiral?" The executive officer turned toward her, surprise evident in his voice. "Now, Commander, then hard starboard, full tactical spread. Move the Roosevelt to bearing 047. The bridge erupted into activity. Klaxons wailed throughout the fleet as sailors ran to battle stations. Kate watched the tactical display, mentally calculating distances, speeds, and angles of approach. "Sir, Naval Command is advising adherence to protocol in this encounter. They're suggesting we maintain course and—" "The intelligence was wrong," Kate said, cutting him off. "Those boats are carrying more than the standard complement of weapons. Look at their draft in the water." Her finger jabbed at the video feed. The Iranian boats sat low in the water, too low for vessels merely carrying a small crew and light weapons. "They're heavily loaded, and they're not approaching in harassment patterns. They're boxing us toward that tanker." She pointed to a civilian vessel that sat unmoving in the distance. "That's not a coincidence." From the corner of the bridge, she caught murmured voices. Emotional call. Typical woman's intuition over hard intelligence. She ignored them. 20 years in the Navy had taught her when to trust her gut over intelligence reports written by analysts sitting in air-conditioned rooms thousands of miles away. "Execute defensive pattern Delta 6. Authorize weapons free on my command only." The Roosevelt began its turn, the escort vessels following suit, breaking the formation the Iranian boats had been herding them into. 3 minutes later, the first explosion rocked the water. The supposedly civilian tanker erupted in a fireball that reached hundreds of feet into the air, right where her fleet would have been. Missile launch detected, multiple hostile targets inbound. What followed was 18 minutes of controlled chaos. Kate's voice remained level as she directed countermeasures, evasive maneuvers, and finally returned fire. Her decisions came rapidly, some by the book, others born from the instinct of years at sea. When the smoke cleared, the Roosevelt and 11 of her escort ships had survived with minimal damage. But 2 destroyers, the USS McKenna and USS Forester, had taken direct hits. The McKenna was listing badly, fires raging across its deck. The Forester had already begun to sink. "Casualty report." Kate said, her voice tight but controlled. 14 confirmed KIA, Admiral. 38 wounded. 14 sailors. 14 lives. Kate's face remained impassive, but inside each name that would later fill those casualty reports etched itself into her conscience. Hours later, as rescue operations continued under the merciless Gulf sun, Kate stood alone on the starboard bridge wing. Victory, they would call it. She had saved the carrier and most of the fleet from a sophisticated ambush. Intelligence would later confirm that the attack had been planned for months, with the intention of dealing a devastating blow to American naval power in the region. But as she watched the somber recovery operations, the bodies being brought aboard with quiet dignity under flag-draped sheets, victory felt hollow. 14 sailors who had trusted her with their lives would never go home. She had made the call that saved hundreds, but those 14 would haunt her dreams. "Quite the decisive action, Admiral." A senior commander from Naval Intelligence had boarded an hour ago. "You'll be receiving commendations for this." The Roosevelt battle group could have been devastated if you'd followed standard protocol. Kate turned her eyes harder than before. Why was our intelligence so wrong? We had no warning of weaponry that sophisticated. The attack was coordinated, professional. The commander's expression flickered. Intelligence gaps happen in this region. Sources can be compromised, signals misinterpreted. Not like this. Those weren't intelligence gaps. That was catastrophic intelligence failure. Later, alone in her quarters, Kate reviewed the after-action reports. Something caught her eye. Discrepancies in the intelligence timeline. Warnings that had been received but never passed up the chain of command. Satellite imagery that had been incorrectly categorized. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. As the Roosevelt steamed towards safer waters, Kate Harrington made a silent vow to the 14 names that would forever be etched in her memory. This wasn't just an intelligence failure. Someone had buried critical information, and whether through incompetence or something darker, they had blood on their hands. The Pentagon's E-ring quarters hummed with the particular energy of power in motion. Men and women in uniform moved with purpose, security badges clipped to tailored uniforms, the quiet deference of rank observed in every interaction. 5 months had passed since the Persian Gulf incident, and Rear Admiral Catherine Harrington walked these halls with the distinct feeling of being both celebrated and sidelined. The conference room door was closed when she approached. Kate checked her watch. She was precisely on time. Through the frosted glass, she could make out the shapes of several high-ranking officers already seated. Taking a breath, she straightened her uniform jacket, adjusted the rows of ribbons above her left breast, and entered. "Gentlemen," she said, acknowledging the room with a crisp nod. 6 men turned toward her, all admirals, all senior to her, all with decades of naval service, reflected in the decorations on their chests. They represented the old guard of naval command men who had risen through the ranks when women were still fighting for the right to serve on combat vessels. Lieutenant? Oh, pardon me, Admiral Harrington." Admiral Phillips, a ruddy-faced man in his 60s, didn't bother to hide his smirk. "Please join us. We were just discussing the Roosevelt incident." Kate took the only remaining seat, acutely aware that it was positioned slightly outside the main circle, as if she were an afterthought to this meeting. "The Roosevelt engagement, sir," she corrected mildly. "Indeed," Phillips said, his tone dismissive. "Your rather unconventional tactics have certainly made waves, young lady." "Young lady?" The condescension was barely veiled, but Kate's expression remained neutral. 20 years of service, a Bronze Star, 2 commendations for valor, and she was still young lady to men like Phillips. "The Naval Review Board has completed its analysis," continued Admiral Westfield, the most senior officer present. "While your actions prevented potentially greater casualties, the loss of the McKenna and Forrester represents a significant tactical failure." Kate felt her jaw tighten, but kept her voice measured. "With respect, Admiral, the intelligence provided to my battle group was fundamentally flawed. We were deliberately misled about the threat assessment." "Careful, Harrington," Phillips warned. "Intelligence is always imperfect. Combat commanders must make decisions with the information available." "Which is precisely what I did, sir," Kate replied, "and I stand by those decisions." A subtle tension filled the room. Kate knew what many of these men thought, that her command was a political appointment, that she'd risen too fast too soon, that her decision-making in the Gulf had been emotional rather than tactical. The door opened and a new figure entered, Admiral James Whitmore. At 78, Whitmore was a living legend in naval circles. He had commanded submarines during the height of the Cold War, faced down Soviet destroyers in the North Sea, and later served as naval operations chief during the Gulf War. His weathered face carried the quiet dignity of a man who had seen the worst of war and the best of those who fought it. More importantly to Kate, he had been her mentor since her days at Annapolis. "Gentlemen," Whitmore said, nodding to the room, "I see you've started without me." "Just reviewing the Roosevelt situation," Jim Westfield said. "Situation, is that what we're calling it now?" Whitmore's voice carried the gruff authority of a man who had earned the right to speak bluntly to anyone. "Seems to me Admiral Harrington's actions prevented the worst naval disaster since the Cole bombing." "At the cost of 2 destroyers, Phillips interjected. 2 destroyers that would have been lost anyway, along with potentially the Roosevelt itself, if she had followed flawed intelligence," Whitmore countered. He turned to Kate. "Admiral Harrington, I've reviewed your after-action report. You mentioned discrepancies in the intelligence timeline." Kate nodded, grateful for the opportunity to address the real issue. "Yes, sir. Critical information was received by forward intelligence assets but never relayed to my command. Satellite imagery showing weapons being loaded onto the supposedly civilian tanker was incorrectly categorized as routine activity. Mistakes happen in intelligence gathering. Admiral Hughes, the naval intelligence representative, said dismissively. Not mistakes of this magnitude, Kate replied, and not multiple failures all pointing in the same direction. Whitmore studied the faces around the table. I believe Admiral Harrington has identified a serious problem that goes beyond one tactical engagement. Our naval base assessment protocols have become dangerously outdated. We're relying too heavily on paper reports and not enough on direct verification. He placed a thick folder on the table. I'm proposing a new methodology for evaluating our strategic naval installations, particularly those showing performance degradation. Phillips scoffed. More paperwork, more committees. Quite the opposite, Whitmore said. I'm suggesting we need eyes on the ground. Real assessment from experienced commanders who can see beyond the reports. Kate understood immediately where Whitmore was headed. Sir, if I may, what if we took a more direct approach, not announced inspections with advance warning, but genuine assessment of operations as they actually function? You mean send in auditors, the bases will just put on a show for them, Hughes said. No, Kate said, leaning forward. I mean embedding experienced officers who can observe real operations without the command structure altering behaviors for inspection. A younger admiral chuckled. What, like some spy movie going undercover at our own bases? Let the men who actually understand these operations handle this, Harrington. Kate didn't rise to the bait. With respect, Admiral, sometimes the most valuable insights come from seeing operations as they truly are, not as they're presented in reports. Whitmore's eyes met hers with the faintest hint of approval. Admiral Harrington has an interesting point, and as it happens, we have the perfect test case. He slid a file across the table. Seahawk Point Naval Station. Once one of our most strategic Cold War installations, now showing alarming degradation in readiness metrics, supply chain efficiency, and operational capabilities. Kate opened the file, scanning the performance reports. The downward trends were impossible to miss. The current commander is being reassigned, Whitmore continued. We need someone to take over, someone who understands both tactical operations and strategic implications, someone who can see problems others might miss. The realization dawned on the other admirals. Phillips sat up straighter. You can't be serious. Harrington Seahawk Point is a mess, but it's still a crucial installation. Precisely why Admiral Harrington is the right choice, Whitmore replied calmly. Unless you're volunteering for the assignment, Phillips. The older admiral recoiled slightly. Seahawk Point was widely considered a career graveyard, a once prestigious command now plagued with problems no one wanted to tackle. Kate kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Whitmore wasn't just offering her a command. He was offering her an opportunity to prove her theories about systemic problems in naval operations. I believe Admiral Harrington could provide valuable insights, Whitmore continued, particularly if she had the opportunity to observe operations before formally assuming command. Kate caught his meaning immediately. A preliminary assessment period, in person, but perhaps not immediately identified as the incoming commander. You mean deceive our own personnel? Hughes asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. I mean understand the actual operational status without the distortion that comes when people know they're being evaluated, Kate countered. See the truth, not the performance. Phillips snorted. This is absurd. We're discussing naval command, not some college theatrical production. Whitmore's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes held a glint of something. Perhaps memory, perhaps amusement. In 1986, I was captaining the USS Michigan, a nuclear submarine in the Barents Sea. We were tracking a Soviet Typhoon-class boat during some of the tensest moments of the Cold War. The room fell silent. Whitmore rarely spoke of his Cold War operations. We received intelligence that the Typhoon was operating under standard patrol protocols. But something felt wrong. The movement patterns didn't match known Soviet doctrine. His voice took on a distant quality. I had to make a decision based on incomplete information with no way to get better intelligence from above. I chose to trust what I was seeing over what I was being told. He looked directly at Kate. 3 hours later, we discovered the Typhoon was testing a new launch protocol that would have reduced missile detection time by nearly 2 minutes. Had we followed standard engagement procedures based on the intelligence provided, we would have lost our tracking advantage at a critical moment in Cold War history. The message was clear. Sometimes seeing the truth required going beyond standard procedures. Admiral Harrington, Sir Whitmore said formally, you are hereby appointed as the incoming commander of Seahawk Point Naval Station, effective 6 weeks from today. Prior to your official assumption of command, you are authorized to conduct a comprehensive operational assessment using whatever methodology you deem appropriate. Your official orders will reflect a temporary administrative assignment to facilitate this assessment. Kate understood. Whitmore was giving her the chance to see Seahawk Point as it really was, not as it would present itself to a new commander. Thank you, sir. I accept the assignment. As the meeting adjourned and the admirals filed out, Whitmore held Kate back with a slight gesture. When they were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly. You stirred up quite a hornet's nest in the Gulf, Katie, he said, using the nickname from her academy days that no one else would dare use now. I did what was necessary, sir. I know. And you were right. His voice lowered. But be careful. The discrepancies you found in the intelligence, they're not all mistakes. Some of them are deliberate. Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Pentagon's aggressive air conditioning. You think someone deliberately withheld critical information from my battle group? I think, Whitmore said carefully, that there are elements within our command structure that prioritize certain agendas over operational safety. The same elements that have allowed bases like Seahawk Point to deteriorate while reports show everything is fine. Kate processed this. Corruption, perhaps, or something more ideological. He studied her face. You're not just going to Seahawk Point to fix a broken base, Kate. You're going there to find out why it broke in the first place, and who broke it. As Kate left the Pentagon that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the river. She thought of the 14 sailors who never came home from the Persian Gulf of the broken intelligence that had sent them into danger unprepared. If what Whitmore suggested was true, their deaths weren't just the result of mistakes. They were the collateral damage of something far more insidious. She had 6 weeks to prepare for what might be the most important mission of her career. Not just commanding a base, but uncovering the rot that threatened the institution she had dedicated her life to serving. Seahawk Point Naval Station rose from the coastline like a monument to faded glory. Once the crown jewel of the Atlantic Fleet's support infrastructure, its massive concrete piers had birthed submarines returning from silent Cold War patrols beneath Arctic ice. Its secure communication bunkers had relayed coded messages that kept American forces one step ahead of Soviet expansion. Its helicopter pads had launched countless covert operations that would never appear in any official history. Now, as Kate studied satellite imagery and base schematics in her temporary apartment, she saw the signs of decay that no report had fully captured. Maintenance facilities operating at half capacity, supply warehouses showing inventory discrepancies, communication systems running on outdated equipment, personnel turnover rates that suggested deep morale problems. What happened to you? She murmured, tracing the outline of the once proud installation. The base's location made it strategically vital, positioned to monitor shipping lanes approaching the eastern seaboard and provide rapid support to Atlantic Fleet operations. During the Cold War, Seahawk Point had been a nerve center for anti-submarine warfare and intelligence gathering operations against the Soviet Union. It had even served as a covert staging ground for CIA operations, though those missions remained classified decades later. Kate had arranged a small apartment 20 miles from the base to serve as her planning headquarters. Maps and reports covered the walls, building a picture of Seahawk Point's current state. The official readiness reports showed concerning but manageable issues, the kind of problems that plagued any aging military installation. But Kate had gone deeper, cross-referencing maintenance logs, supply requisitions, personnel transfers, and budget allocations. The picture that emerged was far more troubling. Essential equipment sat unrepaired for months, while paperwork showed it operational. Critical supply shipments disappeared from inventory without explanation. Communication systems failed regular security audits, yet were certified as secure. Something was fundamentally broken in Seahawk Point's command structure. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The man who entered was in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades at sea. Commander Thomas Reynolds, retired, had served with Whitmore during the Cold War and was now part of the small, trusted team supporting Kate's mission. "You've been at this for 3 days straight," he said, placing a cup of coffee on the table. "Found anything that wasn't in the briefs?" Kate gestured to the wall of data. "Everything and nothing. The problems are obvious once you look past the official reports, but I can't find the source. It's like watching a ship take on water without finding the breach in the hull." Reynolds studied the diagrams. "You won't find it in these reports. The people causing problems don't document their own sabotage. Maybe not directly, but patterns emerge. Kate pointed to a section of data. The logistics department is the epicenter. That's where discrepancies begin before they ripple through the rest of the base. Makes sense. Control the supply chain, control the operation. Reynolds had spent his career in naval logistics before retiring. What's your assessment of the key personnel? Kate pulled several files from a stack. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Mitchell, Logistics Director. Excellent record combat experience in the First Gulf War, transferred to Seahawk Point 3 years ago after a distinguished tenure at Norfolk. By all accounts, he's competent and dedicated, but overwhelmed. Who works under him? Major Allison Carter heads the logistics team directly. Also well-regarded, works brutal hours trying to keep things running. Kate moved to another file. Master Sergeant Marcus Cole runs the repair depot. 25 years in service, decorated in Desert Storm reputation as a straight shooter who doesn't tolerate incompetence. Reynolds nodded. And communications. First Sergeant David Wilson. Former Afghanistan, manages to keep outdated systems running through what several reports call creative improvisation. Kate paused at the next file. And then there's Colonel Victor Sullivan, Deputy Base Commander. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Your future second in command. What's his story? Former SEAL, decorated multiple times, managed several sensitive operations in the Middle East. Kate's expression showed her uncertainty. On paper, he's exemplary, but something doesn't fit. Every department under his direct supervision shows these same patterns of discrepancy. You think he's involved in whatever's happening? I don't know, but his signature is on reports that contradict physical reality. Either he's not verifying what he's signing or he knows exactly what he's signing, Reynolds finished. And why? Kate turned to the window, looking out toward where Seahawk Point lay beyond the horizon. There's something else. 3 months ago, Naval Intelligence placed Sullivan on a watch list for a possible security investigation, but the file was suddenly closed 2 weeks later. No explanation. Reynolds' expression darkened. That's not normal procedure. No, it's not. Kate gathered the files into a neat stack. Which is why I need to see Seahawk Point with my own eyes, not as its new commander, but as someone invisible to its power structure. You think you can just walk onto a naval base unrecognized? Your face has been in military publications since the Roosevelt incident. Kate smiled slightly. Most people see the uniform, not the person wearing it. Without admiral stars on my shoulders, I'm just another face in a very big Navy. She pulled out another file, her cover identity. Catherine Kate Marshall, Administrative Specialist, transferring to Seahawk Point to assist with logistics systems integration. A real position that had been quietly adjusted to serve her purposes. Administrative Specialist, Reynolds looked skeptical. That's a long way from flag officer, which makes it perfect. No one looks closely at administrative staff. Their furniture, present but invisible. Kate had spent her early career observing how differently people treated her as she rose through the ranks. The higher her position, the less people showed their true nature around her. And if someone recognizes you, only a handful of people at Seahawk know what the new commander looks like, and I've arranged to avoid them initially. She checked her watch. My orders are processed. I report in 3 days as Kate Marshall, Admin Specialist. For the next 4 weeks, I'll see Seahawk Point as it really is, not the version they'll prepare for Admiral Harrington's arrival. Reynolds studied her with newfound respect. Risky play. If it goes wrong, it won't. Kate's voice carried the quiet confidence that had helped her rise through a system designed to hold women back. Because no one expects an admiral to serve as her own advanced scout. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the Atlantic, a plain government sedan approached Seahawk Point's main gate. The base rose before Kate, more imposing in person than in photographs. Massive cranes stood sentinel over deep-water piers. Radar installations swept the horizon in endless rotation. Communications towers reached skyward like steel fingers grasping at clouds. But Kate's trained eye caught what casual observers would miss. Rust creeping along gantries. Empty maintenance bays that should have been active. A patrol boat listing slightly at its mooring signs of neglected bilge pumps. The surface appeared functional, but beneath it, Seahawk Point was slowly drowning. Kate wore civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, and a light jacket that concealed the athletic build developed through decades of naval physical training. Her hair, usually kept in a regulation bun, fell loose around her shoulders. Without uniform or rank insignia, she looked like any mid-level government employee reporting for a new assignment. The guard at the gate barely glanced at her ID. "Marshall, write the new admin transfer. Sign here." He pushed a clipboard toward her window. As she signed, a group of Marines near the gatehouse laughed among themselves. One glanced her way and smirked. Another desk jockey. Hope she types faster than the last one. The casual dismissal was exactly what Kate had expected, even wanted. Invisibility was her asset now. Administrative building is Central Complex, Building C, the guard said, handing back her ID. Report to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's office, 3rd floor. Kate drove through the base with careful attention. Everything looked functional at first glance. Personnel moving with purpose, vehicles in motion, flags snapping in the ocean breeze. But the trained eye could spot the symptoms of institutional decay. Maintenance vehicles that should have been deployed sat idle in parking areas. A communications antenna showed jury-rigged repairs. Personnel moved quickly, but with the harried pace of the perpetually understaffed, not the confident efficiency of a well-run operation. Inside Building C, the atmosphere reflected the same contradiction. The lobby presented a professional military appearance. Polished floors, proper signage, personnel in pressed uniforms. But beneath the surface, outdated computer systems, overflowing paperwork, and the subtle tension of people operating under constant strain. The elevator creaked as it carried her to the 3rd floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a corridor that served as the logistics nerve center for a complex that supported thousands of personnel and dozens of vessels. It should have hummed with coordinated activity. Instead, it conveyed the desperate energy of constant crisis management. Kate approached the office marked Lieutenant Colonel R. Mitchell, Director of Logistics. After a brief knock, she entered to find a man in his early 40s bent over a desk crowded with files and a computer showing multiple alert notifications. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleep was a rare commodity. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, she said. Kate Marshall, Administrative Support. Reporting as ordered. Mitchell looked up, his gaze passing over her without truly registering her presence. He was handsome in the weathered way of career military officers, with short-cropped hair, graying at the temples, and the lean physique of someone who maintained physical standards despite desk duty. Marshall. He glanced at a personnel notification on his screen. Right, another admin transfer. He sighed heavily. I needed a logistics coordinator with inventory experience, and they send me a clerk. The words weren't directed at her so much as at the system that consistently failed to provide what he actually needed. I have some experience with supply systems, sir, Kate offered. Mitchell's laugh held no humor. Everyone has some experience. What I need is someone who can make sense of a system that's held together with digital duct tape and bureaucratic prayers. He rubbed his temples. Major Carter will get you situated. She's running the logistics team, and they're underwater right now. He pressed an intercom button. Allison, your new admin is here. Marshall from Norfolk. A moment later, Major Allison Carter appeared. In her mid-30s, she carried herself with the crisp efficiency of someone who compensated for a chaotic environment with personal discipline. Her uniform was immaculate despite the base's general state of disorder. Major Carter, this is Kate Marshall. Get her set up with system access and put her on the inbound shipment backlog. We need those reconciliations done yesterday. Carter nodded sharply. Yes, sir. She turned to Kate. Follow me, Ms. Marshall. We'll get you situated. As they walked through the logistics center, Kate took in the controlled chaos. Staff members moved between workstations with the frantic energy of people perpetually behind schedule. Phones rang constantly. Printers churned out reports that seemed destined for overcrowded inboxes. Welcome to the front lines of the paper war, Carter said, her tone professionally neutral but tinged with exhaustion. You're stepping into a backlog that would make most people run for the hills. From a nearby desk, a sergeant leaned back in his chair and smirked. Hope she can type faster than the last one, ma'am, he called over. Or at least not cry in the bathroom on day 3. A few nearby clerks chuckled. Kate recognized the gallows humor of people using laughter to cope with impossible situations. Carter shot the sergeant a withering look. Sergeant Briggs, if you have time for commentary, you have time to run the priority requisition queue. No, ma'am, he replied quickly, turning back to his screen. Carter led Kate to an empty desk near the window. You can start here. Log in with these temporary credentials until your permanent account processes. We'll have you working on incoming shipment reconciliation and tracking misrouted supplies. Kate nodded, taking in the view from her new position. Through the window, she could see the massive cranes of the shipyard, several vessels docked for maintenance, and vehicles moving across the complex. From this vantage point, she could watch the physical manifestation of the data flowing through the systems she would now monitor. If you see something that makes no sense, flag it, Carter continued. Don't assume it's your mistake. Odds are the mistake started 3 months ago and has been compounding ever since. Yes, ma'am, Kate replied, settling into the chair that would serve as her observation post for the coming weeks. As Carter walked away, Kate allowed her fingers to rest lightly on the keyboard. The screen before her filled with lines of data, requisition numbers, shipment codes, inventory locations. Behind each entry was a unit waiting for something they needed to do their job. And behind many entries, she suspected was evidence of the corruption slowly eating away at Seahawk Point's operational capability. No one in the busy room paid her any further attention. She was just another administrative transfer, another cog in a broken machine. None of them saw what she really was, the advanced scout for her own command, mapping the territory before officially claiming it. None of them recognized that the unassuming woman at the corner desk was a rear admiral with the power to reshape their world. Kate began to work her eyes, cataloging every detail, her mind connecting patterns, invisible to those who didn't know where to look. She didn't complain, didn't try to impress anyone with stories or clever comments. She listened, she watched, she learned. Outside the windows, the Atlantic stretched, blue and limitless, toward the horizon. Ships moved in and out of the harbor, defenders of that horizon, protectors of the vast sea lanes that kept America connected to the world. Those ships depended on bases like Seahawk Point, and right now Seahawk Point was failing them. Kate's mission had begun. In the coming weeks, she would trace every thread of dysfunction, follow every suspicious pattern, identify every weakness. And when she finally took command as Admiral Harrington, she would know exactly where to begin the process of redemption. What she couldn't yet know was how dangerous that process would prove to be, or how high the corruption reached beyond Seahawk Point's crumbling walls. Kate Marshall became a fixture in Seahawk Point's logistics office with remarkable speed. She arrived before sunrise each morning, often finding only the night shift personnel still at their stations. She left well after sunset, when most of the administrative staff had already headed home to families and the comfort of lives untouched by the constant pressure of military readiness. Her desk, once bare, now resembled an archaeological dig of Seahawk Point's operational history. Reports, requisition forms, and maintenance logs were arranged in careful stacks, each one representing a thread in the complex tapestry she was weaving in her mind. To the casual observer, she appeared to be nothing more than a dedicated civil servant, perhaps excessively so. No one suspected she was mapping the nervous system of a dying command. It was past midnight on her 5th day when she noticed the young sailor. Seaman First Class Turner sat alone at his terminal, staring at a screen filled with error messages. His shoulders slumped with the particular defeat of someone drowning in a system they couldn't understand. Kate had observed him throughout the week, always staying late, always looking increasingly desperate. Still fighting with it? Kate asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee from the break room's ancient machine. Turner looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from fatigue and frustration. He couldn't have been more than 22. Probably fresh from training and thrust into a position meant for someone with years more experience. Yes, ma'am, he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. These legacy entries, they're all wrong. But when I fix one, 3 more error flags pop up somewhere else. It's like the system is fighting me. Kate pulled a chair beside him. Show me what you're working with. The screen displayed an inventory tracking system she recognized immediately. In fact, she had been part of the committee that approved its implementation 4 years earlier. The system was elegant in its design, but unforgiving of errors. Once bad data entered the chain, it multiplied like a virus. See, these supply codes don't match the physical inventory, Turner explained, pointing to a column of red flags. I've been staying late for weeks, trying to reconcile them, but I'm falling further behind. Major Carter doesn't know how bad it's gotten. Kate studied the screen, quickly identifying patterns in the chaos. The system's not broken, she said softly. It's working exactly as designed. It's the input data that's corrupted. Can it be fixed? The hope in Turner's voice was almost painful to hear. Everything can be fixed, Kate replied, a hint of her command authority slipping into her tone. She caught herself and softened her approach. Let's start with the primary validation sequences. For the next 3 hours, Kate guided Turner through the labyrinth of the system. She created a simple checklist for him to follow, explaining not just the steps, but the logic behind them. With each correction, the cascade of errors began to slow, then stop, then reverse. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, Turner stared at the screen in disbelief. The sea of red flags had diminished to a manageable few dozen. I don't understand, he said. How do you know all this? The training manual doesn't cover half of what you just showed me. Kate smiled slyly. Let's just say I've seen this system break before. Sometimes the people who design things don't fully understand how they'll be used in the field. Turner's gratitude was palpable. Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Seriously, most people just tell me to figure it out or report to Major Carter that I'm too slow. You're not slow, Turner. You were set up to fail. Kate's voice carried a quiet certainty. The system only works when everyone has the right tools. You were given a hammer and told to turn a screw. As she walked back to her desk, Kate made a mental note. It wasn't just equipment and supplies being mismanaged at Seahawk Point. It was people. Young sailors thrust into positions without proper training, then blamed for the inevitable failures that followed. By the end of her second week, Kate had compiled a detailed map of Seahawk Point's dysfunctions. Every department showed similar patterns. Resource shortages blamed on the system, maintenance backlogs attributed to budget constraints, communication failures dismissed as equipment aging. But beneath these convenient excuses, she found a deliberate pattern of misdirection. The motor pool provided her first solid evidence. Requisition forms showed critical vehicle parts arriving at the base, but those same parts never reached the maintenance bays. Supply reports listed fully operational vehicles that sat idle with engines removed. Fuel allocations disappeared into a black hole of administrative adjustments. Kate requested a stack of forms from Major Carter. I need these signed off at the motor pool, she explained. Some of them have been pending for weeks. Carter's expression showed surprise. You're volunteering to go to the Lion's Den. Staff Sergeant Cole has reduced 3 logistics officers to tears this month alone. I'm pretty resilient, Kate replied with a faint smile. The motor pool smelled of oil, hot metal, and the particular tang of military-grade hydraulic fluid. Massive service bays house vehicles in various states of disassembly. Humvees with their hoods raised like gaping mouths, 7-ton trucks up on lifts, MRAPs with their armor panels removed, exposing the vulnerable systems beneath. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole stood amid the controlled chaos clipboard, in hand barking orders with the precision of a man who had spent decades keeping machines alive under impossible conditions. Grease streaked his forearms, and his uniform bore the honorable stains of someone who worked alongside his team rather than just directing them. Kate approached only after Cole finished delivering a blistering critique to a young private about proper torque specifications. The veteran NCO turned to her eyes, registering her admin badge with immediate dismissal. Let me guess, he said, voice rough from years of shouting over engine noise. More promises from logistics that parts are definitely absolutely coming this time. Requisitions to confirm, Staff Sergeant, Kate replied evenly, holding out the forms. Some need signatures before we can move them up the chain. Cole took the stack, flipping through them with growing disgust. I'm not signing off on this fiction, he said, thrusting the clipboard back at her. You want me to certify we're good with parts we don't have, so somebody can check a box and call it done. The mechanics nearby exchanged knowing glances. This was clearly a familiar scene. You look new, Cole added, giving her a more careful assessment. Here's some free advice. Don't touch fleet vehicles with your paperwork unless you understand what happens when they don't move. Rookies shouldn't be handling these requests. Kate met his gaze without flinching. I understand your concern, Staff Sergeant. I'm not asking you to certify anything untrue. I'm asking what you need on paper so we can stop pretending parts are somewhere they're not. Cole's expression shifted slightly, surprise replacing contempt. You're the first admin to say that out loud, he said, studying her with new interest. Then let's start there, Kate replied. Show me what you actually need, not what the forms say you should have. Cole hesitated, then nodded toward a row of Humvees sitting dormant. Those 5 vehicles have been dead for 3 months. Requisitions for transmission components were approved and supposedly shipped. The parts never arrived, but the system shows them as delivered. To whom, Kate asked. That's the million-dollar question, Cole replied. Supply Officer Peterson signs for everything, but when I ask him directly, he claims they were delivered to my staff. Yet no one here has seen them. Kate made careful notes as Cole walked her through the motor pool, pointing out discrepancies between the official records and physical reality. With each example, the pattern became clearer. It wasn't bureaucratic incompetence. It was systematic theft disguised as administrative error. Why hasn't this been reported up the chain? Kate asked. Cole's laugh was bitter. Reported to whom I've filed 7 official discrepancy reports in the past year. All of them disappeared into administrative limbo. He fixed her with a measuring look. What makes you different from the last 5 people logistics sent over? Kate chose her words carefully. I believe you, she said simply, and I don't accept that's just how it is as an answer. As she left the motor pool forms in hand with Cole's detailed annotations, rather than simple signatures, Kate felt eyes following here. Not just Cole's, but those of his team, men and women who had grown accustomed to being ignored, their expertise dismissed by the very system they served. Back in her apartment that evening, Kate added Cole's information to her growing evidence wall. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Supply Officer Captain James Peterson appeared to be the nexus of the diversion network. His signature appeared on hundreds of forms acknowledging receipt of materials that never reached their intended destinations. But Peterson wasn't working alone. The scale and consistency of the operations suggested organization protection and very likely a commanding officer's implicit approval or deliberate blindness. Kate's suspicion turned increasingly toward Colonel Sullivan. Her next target was the communications center. First Sergeant David Wilson oversaw a department critical to Seahawk Point's operational capability, yet chronically plagued by equipment failures and security vulnerabilities. The communications hub hummed with the mechanical heartbeat of military information systems. Racks of equipment lined the walls, some modern, many antiquated. Cables snaked along floors and ceilings like technological vines. Some neatly bundled, others jury-rigged in ways that suggested desperation rather than design. Wilson met her at the door, his expression guarded. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet competence of someone who had learned his craft in combat zones where failure meant dead comrades. Logistics sent you, he asked, eyeing her admin badge. I'm trying to understand what we're breaking on your side of the operation, Kate replied honestly. Wilson's short laugh contained no humor. Where do you want to start? Half our primary relay equipment is past recommended replacement dates. The backup systems are cannibalized from even older platforms. We're running at maybe 60% capacity on a good day. He gestured toward a rack of equipment where status lights blinked in concerning patterns. See that if one more component fails, we lose redundancy completely. One lightning strike, one power surge, one bad day, and this base goes deaf and mute at the worst possible moment. Kate walked the line of equipment, noting model numbers and maintenance tags. The way panels had been taped back into place, the improvised cooling systems crafted from repurposed parts. What happens when you push this up the chain, she asked, though she suspected the answer. I've been pushing for months, Wilson replied, frustration evident in his voice. Requisitions vanish into the system. We're told we're not in the highest priority category, so we get bumped down the list. On paper, we're stable. In reality, we're one thunderstorm away from disaster. Kate didn't make empty promises. She didn't flash credentials she wasn't yet ready to reveal. She simply asked the right questions and listened to the answers, cataloging each one in her methodical mental inventory. What do you need most urgently? She asked finally. Wilson listed components by name and number, each one critical to maintaining the base's communication integrity. Kate wrote them down not as an admin clerk, completing a checklist, but as an admiral, quietly assembling a picture of catastrophic vulnerability. As the weeks passed, word began to spread through Seahawk Point about the new logistics woman who actually listens. Kate found herself approached in the mess hall and corridors, even in the parking lot, by personnel eager to share their frustrations with someone who didn't immediately dismiss them. The tone around her shifted by degrees. In the early days when she entered a room, the first reaction had been dismissive laughter or gossip about the paper pushers ruining everything. Later conversations would dip momentarily as she passed curious eyes following her movement. How did she know about that obscure protocol from the Pacific Fleet? Why did she understand both high-level system architecture and the smallest mechanical details? Why did she treat junior personnel with more respect than most officers showed to formal reports? No one had answers yet. They only knew she didn't fit neatly into the box they'd built in their heads for an administrative transfer. The coffee in the break room was particularly terrible that morning, bitter and burnt from sitting on the warmer too long. Kate poured a cup anyway, more as a prop than from desire. The morning briefing had mentioned an incoming supply aircraft scheduled for that night, carrying many of the critical components Wilson Cole and others had been requesting for months. As she stirred a packet of sugar into the murky liquid, her sleeve caught on the edge of the counter, sliding up her forearm just enough to reveal the ink beneath. A simple black trident weathered with age, the unofficial mark of Pacific Fleet Special Operations Group. No color, no flourish, just a quiet record of service in a unit few outside naval special warfare would recognize. Petty Officer Moore, who had been refilling his own cup, caught the glimpse and froze mid-motion. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "where'd you get that ink?" Kate glanced down, then tugged her sleeve back into place with practiced casualness. "Old mistake," she replied, her tone deliberately light. "Kept it to remind myself." Moore's laugh was uncertain. Must have been pretty deep Navy to have one of those. Kate just smiled, a small curve of her lips that offered no invitation for further questions. But Moore's expression had already shifted from casual curiosity to something more calculating. He wouldn't be the last to notice such details. Later that day in the mess hall, two young officers debated which Japanese port city had the best food. "Yokosuka's ramen shops can't be beaten," one insisted. "Sasebo has better yakitori hands down," the other countered. Without thinking, Kate replied in flawless Japanese, her accent indistinguishable from a native Yokosukan. The officers stared at her, conversation forgotten. "You sound like a local," the older one said, tilting his head. "You stationed in Japan or something?" "Once upon a time," Kate answered, simply gathering her tray and walking away, leaving them exchanging puzzled glances. That night, Kate walked the perimeter of the airfield, her jacket zipped against the chill coming off the Atlantic. The tarmac gleamed under security lights, its surface dotted with parked aircraft like sleeping giants. Her ID badge gave her access to most areas of the base, though she was careful to maintain her administrative cover. A young sergeant stepped from the guard shack, flashlight beam cutting across her path. "Ma'am, hold up. You're not cleared for the flight line this late." Kate handed him her ID without hesitation. He studied it under his light, frowning at the basic clearance level. "Administrative transfer, huh? Regulations say no unauthorized personnel past 2,300 hours. Section 7, Paragraph 2, Security Operations Manual," Kate replied evenly. "Late-night inspection exemptions apply to command-designated observers." The sergeant blinked, lowering his flashlight slightly. You know that by heart." "Regulations are only useful if you remember them," she said quietly. He cleared his throat, straightening almost unconsciously. "Understood, ma'am. Carry on." As Kate walked away, she felt the sergeant's eyes follow her, his flashlight beam wavering between duty and uncertainty. She continued her circuit of the flight line, each step measured and purposeful, cataloging security vulnerabilities, camera blind spots, and access points. The Atlantic wind pulled at her hair as she completed her assessment, mind already formulating the corrective measures she would implement once she officially assumed command. But that was still weeks away, and the evidence she had gathered suggested Seahawk Point might face a crisis long before then. The morning sky hung low and heavy over Seahawk Point, the color of wet steel. Weather systems moving up the Atlantic seaboard had merged into what meteorologists were calling a significant coastal event, the kind of storm that tested naval installations even in their prime condition. From the logistics office window, Kate watched the first sheets of rain blur the outlines of the ships in port. The flag above the headquarters building snapped violently in the increasing wind, its movements sharp and erratic like the pulse of an agitated heart. Inside, the pace had intensified. Phones rang constantly as departments across the base prepared for the storm. Major Carter moved from station to station, her normally composed demeanor showing cracks of strain. "We have a supply aircraft inbound tonight," she told Kate, running a hand through hair that had escaped its usual perfect bun. "Critical mission components, communications, replacements, some of the parts Cole has been requesting for months." "If the weather holds," Kate replied, watching the storm front advancing over the water. Carter's expression tightened. "If the weather turns, we lose another week, at best." She lowered her voice. "Command already thinks we're a problem base. One more missed delivery, one more system failure, and we'll have inspectors crawling all over us." Kate nodded, understanding the implications all too well. She had seen bases become examples in headquarters discussions, their failures used to justify budget cuts, personnel reassignments, even decommissioning. Once that reputation took hold, good people transferred out, resources dried up, and the downward spiral accelerated. Outside, thunder rolled closer, a low physical pressure that seemed to compress the air inside the building. The first real winds began to hit, driving rain against the windows in horizontal sheets. By mid-afternoon, the storm had fully established its dominion over Seahawk Point. Kate had stayed at her terminal, methodically tracking the supply aircraft's approach and correlating it with weather patterns. The pilot would be facing challenging conditions, but nothing beyond the capabilities of an experienced military crew, provided they had proper guidance from the ground. Down the hall, someone cursed as the network connection hiccuped. A printer spat out half a page, then died with the particular whine of machinery surrendering to electrical instability. Kate's screen flickered, then stabilized. The base was now operating on backup power systems, some of which she knew from Wilson's reports were compromised. She pulled up the maintenance logs for the primary generators, noting that scheduled inspections had been deferred 3 times in the past 6 months. At 1647, the first real warning came, a long descending electronic tone from the communications center, followed by an urgent call to Major Carter's office. "What do you mean the tower just lost primary communications?" Carter's voice carried down the hall, sharp with disbelief. "The redundancies are supposed to handle surges like that. When was the last—" "All right, we're coming down." She appeared in the doorway of the logistics office, her expression grim. "Everyone save your work now," she announced. "We have a communications system failure developing. Marshal with me." Kate was already on her feet, following Carter through corridors where the lights flickered ominously. Outside, the storm pounded the base with increasing fury, water spraying under door frames and through aging window seals. The communications hub had transformed from organized technological efficiency into a scene of controlled chaos. Screens that normally displayed stable green status indicators now showed alarming patterns of yellow and red warnings. Data streams that should have flowed smoothly across monitors now stuttered or froze entirely. First Sergeant Wilson stood at the main console, headset around his neck, barking into a landline phone. "I don't care what the software says," he snapped. "I'm telling you, the relay is not holding. We have an aircraft inbound, and the tower cannot maintain clear channels. If we lose this link in this weather, we're flying blind." He slammed the handset down, jaw tight with frustration. "Major," he acknowledged Carter, "it's worse than it looks." "What happened?" Carter asked, moving to the main display. "Primary antenna array took a hit," Wilson explained. "Not a direct lightning strike, but enough of a power surge to cook one of the key components we've been waiting to replace. We're trying to route communications through the backup chain, but it's choking under the load." Kate moved to a secondary display, quickly assessing the situation. The storm had triggered exactly the cascade of failures Wilson had warned about. The primary communications array was functioning at less than 50% capacity. The backup systems, already compromised by age and cannibalization, were struggling to compensate. Most critically, data from the incoming aircraft's transponder appeared intermittently, like a heartbeat becoming irregular. "The tower is getting intermittent contact with the supply aircraft," Wilson continued. "They can hear us, sometimes not. If they can't maintain positive communications, they'll have to divert or wave off. In this weather, that means we lose the shipment entirely." A young airman at a monitoring station turned in his chair, his expression tense. "Ma'am, the system is also misreporting ground vehicle positions," he said to Carter. "The storm's interfering with the tracking updates. If we need to get emergency vehicles to the runway, we'll be guessing locations." The room buzzed with overlapping voices, suggestions, complaints, half-formed plans that dissolved as quickly as they materialized. The officer on duty, a lieutenant named Harris, flipped frantically through a procedure manual that clearly hadn't anticipated this particular combination of failures. Kate absorbed it all, her mind processing the information with the speed and clarity that had made her an exceptional tactical commander. She noted not just the technical failures, but the human responses. Who panicked, who remained focused, who looked to others for direction rather than providing it themselves. Through the speakers mounted near the ceiling, the tower radio crackled with distortion. "Seahawk Tower, this is Cargo Flight Victor 79er. Reading you broken and intermittent. Experiencing severe turbulence. Fuel margins tightening. Request clear comms and approach guidance. Over." For a critical moment, no one answered. Lieutenant Harris hesitated, his eyes flicking between failing displays as if willing them back to functionality. The tower operator's voice came through uncertain. Victor 79er, this is Seahawk Tower. We're experiencing technical difficulties. Stand by while we—" The transmission dissolved into static. Kate had seen enough. Without conscious decision, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. "Reroute tower communications to frequency 325, she said, the command tone impossible to suppress entirely. Wilson checked the backup antenna chain physically, not just through the system diagnostics. "I want eyes on every connection from the relay to the tower input." The room fell suddenly quiet, all eyes turning toward the administrative specialist who had just issued orders with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Cole needs to get a dedicated generator line feeding this room immediately, Kate continued. We cannot afford another power fluctuation. First Sergeant Wilson stared at her for a moment, something like recognition flickering in his eyes. But professional instinct overrode curiosity. He grabbed his toolkit and headed for the equipment racks without argument. On it, he said simply. Lieutenant Harris found his voice. Ma'am, we can't just change frequencies without proper authorization. The protocols clearly state, the tower has multi-band capability. Kate interrupted, her voice level, but brooking no argument. They can shift to 325 as an alternate approach frequency. The aircraft can as well. The current channel is compromised by atmospheric interference. We need a cleaner band within their onboard preset range. How do you know that? Harris asked, bewilderment evident in his tone. Kate fixed him with a steady gaze. Because I watched an entire carrier group nearly lose a resupply flight over the Gulf when we hesitated for 30 seconds arguing about protocol instead of acting. She turned to the communications operator. Call the tower, now. Major Carter stood frozen, staring at Kate as if seeing a stranger. There was confusion in her expression, but also the dawning realization that the unassuming administrative specialist had just revealed depths of knowledge and authority that no clerk should possess. Kate leaned over the main console, fingers moving with practiced confidence across controls she shouldn't have known how to operate. She didn't push aside the young operator, but pointed precisely. Here, she said, reroute the tower feed through this circuit, confirm the alternate frequency in the system, then patch me into their audio. The tower controller's voice came through tense but professional. Victor 79er Seahawk Tower. Still reading you broken. Say again your fuel state. Static crackled, then a fragmented reply. Tower. Victor 79er. Fuel below comfort margins. Divert options limited. Requesting priority guidance. Repeat requesting. Kate motioned for the headset. The operator handed it to her without hesitation, something in Kate's demeanor making refusal unthinkable. This is Seahawk Point, Kate said into the microphone, her voice taking on the calm authority of command. Victor 79er switched to approach frequency 325. I say again, 325. Confirm when on channel. She waited, counting seconds in her head. Outside, thunder crashed directly overhead, making the lights flicker ominously. First Sergeant Wilson's voice came through on the internal line. Backup antenna is patched and stable, he reported. I bypassed the damaged segment. You should see cleaner signal on the new frequency. As if in confirmation, the aircraft's signal strengthened on the display. The pilot's voice came through with remarkable clarity compared to the previous transmissions. Seahawk Point, Victor 79er on 325, reading you 5x5 now. Kate nodded with satisfaction. Victor 79er Seahawk Point. We have you clear now. Maintain current heading. Tower is vectoring you through the least severe part of the cell. Expect moderate turbulence, but you're within safe parameters. Priority landing is confirmed. Ground support standing by. The tower controller, reinvigorated by the restoration of communications, took over with renewed confidence. Victor 79er Tower. Continue approach, heading 095. Descend and maintain. Kate stepped back, allowing the professionals to do their jobs, now that the critical path had been established. She turned to the young airmen monitoring ground vehicles. Forget the automated positions, she told him. Start manual status checks. Call the motor pool security medical. Get human confirmation for any vehicle that might need runway access. Don't trust the displays until we have visual verification. Yes, ma'am, he replied, reaching for a handset. Kate made one more call. Get me Staff Sergeant Cole, she instructed the internal communications operator. If we need a generator line to this building, he's the one who can make it happen. Minutes later, Cole's voice came through background noise, indicating he was already outside in the storm. They tell me you need juice, he said without preamble. I'm outside with a team and a portable generator. Storm's nasty, but we can tie you in if the building feed goes unstable again. Set it up, Kate ordered. I'll clear any access requirements. I don't want these boards going dark while that aircraft is on approach. You got it, Cole replied simply. No questions about her authority or position. Something in her voice had triggered his instinct to follow legitimate command. In the communications center, the situation began to stabilize. The backup antenna array with Wilson's emergency repairs carried the new load without failing. The tower's guidance became increasingly precise as the signal quality improved. The incoming aircraft's position resolved into a clear icon moving steadily along its approach vector. In less than 15 minutes, what had been developing into a potential disaster had transformed into a challenging but manageable situation. The professionals around Kate had responded to clear direction with the competence they had always possessed, but rarely been allowed to exercise fully. Colonel Victor Sullivan chose that moment to enter the communications center, his uniform impeccable, despite the storm his bearing radiating the confidence of command. He surveyed the room quickly, his gaze settling on the unfamiliar figure at the center of activity. "What's happening here?" he demanded, his deep voice cutting through the background communications. Major Carter stepped forward. "Communications failure during the storm, sir. We've established alternate channels to guide in the supply aircraft." Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, particularly the administrative specialist who stood with unmistakable authority amid the crisis. "Who authorized changing standard approach frequencies?" he asked, his tone dangerously quiet. Before Carter could answer, Kate turned to face him directly. "The primary frequency was compromised by storm interference, Colonel. The aircraft was losing contact and running low on fuel. Alternate channels were established to ensure safe approach and landing." Sullivan studied her with cold assessment. "And you are?" "Kate Marshall, Administrative Support," she replied evenly, "assigned to Major Carter's logistics team." "Administrative support," Sullivan repeated, skepticism evident in every syllable. "And you took it upon yourself to override communications protocols during an emergency." "I suggested a technical solution that the qualified personnel implemented, sir," Kate answered, her tone respectful but unyielding. "The aircraft needed clear guidance. Time was critical." The tower's voice interrupted the confrontation. "Communications Center, this is Tower. Victor 79er has landed safely, taxiing to Hangar 3. A collective exhale passed through the room. Several technicians exchanged relieved glances. The immediate crisis had passed. Sullivan's expression remained hard. "Major Carter, I expect a full report on this incident and the unauthorized protocol deviations." Within the hour, his gaze returned to Kate. "As for you, Ms. Marshall, report to my office tomorrow at 0700. We need to discuss the appropriate channels for administrative personnel to offer suggestions." As Sullivan turned to leave, Kate caught the quick glances exchanged between Carter Wilson and several technicians, a mix of concern and something else. Something like dawning recognition that the unassuming woman in their midst might be far more than she appeared. Outside, the storm continued to batter Seahawk Point, but its fury seemed diminished now, as if it too recognized it had met a force more implacable than itself. The supply aircraft had landed safely, bringing with it the critical components so many departments had been desperately awaiting. What no one in the room yet realized was that with those same winds, a far more significant change had arrived at Seahawk Point, the first gusts of a storm that would soon sweep away the corruption and neglect that had nearly destroyed this once proud installation. Kate Marshall watched the radar screen as the aircraft completed its taxi to the hangar, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. But inside, Admiral Catherine Harrington was already preparing for the next phase of her mission, one that would begin with a very interesting meeting in Colonel Sullivan's office tomorrow morning. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Seahawk Point drenched but intact. The sky had cleared to a crystalline blue that belied the chaos of the previous night. Kate stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the base come to life in the aftermath. Maintenance crews cleared debris from roadways. Security patrols assessed perimeter fencing. Aircraft ground crews inspected for damage on the tarmac. She checked her watch, 0600, 1 hour until her meeting with Sullivan. Kate had slept little, spending the night reviewing her options. Her original plan had called for another 2 weeks of covert assessment before revealing her identity. The storm had forced her hand, requiring her to display knowledge and authority that no administrative clerk should possess. Sullivan was no fool. He would have questions. Questions she wasn't yet ready to answer. Her secure satellite phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Admiral Whitmore's name appeared on the display. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," he said when she answered. His gravelly voice carried a mix of concern and amusement. "Naval intelligence picked up increased encrypted communications from Seahawk Point to several unauthorized terminals last night. The storm forced me to take a more active role than planned," Kate replied, keeping her voice low despite the counter-surveillance measures protecting her apartment. "Sullivan? He's suspicious. I'm meeting him at 0700. Whitmore's pause carried a weight Kate recognized, the consideration of a commander weighing tactical options. "Our intelligence team reports that one of Sullivan's offshore accounts received a significant wire transfer an hour after the aircraft landed. He's accelerating his timeline." The aircraft didn't just bring replacement parts, Kate said, the pieces clicking into place. It brought something he needed for a major transaction. Precisely, which means your timeline has compressed considerably. Kate nodded, though Whitmore couldn't see her. I'll adjust accordingly. Be careful, Katie, Whitmore said, his voice softening slightly. Sullivan has powerful friends, the kind that make inconvenient investigations disappear. After ending the call, Kate moved methodically through her morning routine. She showered dressed in the same unassuming attire she'd worn for weeks. Dark slacks, a simple blouse, the deliberately forgettable wardrobe of administrative staff. But this time she added something else, a thin chain around her neck, hidden beneath her collar, carrying her actual military ID. At precisely 0655, Kate walked through the headquarters building's main entrance. Water still pooled in depressions on the floor where the storm had forced its way inside. Maintenance personnel were replacing ceiling tiles stained from overnight leaks. A young ensign stood as she approached Sullivan's office. "Ms. Marshall," he said, his tone formal. "The colonel is expecting you." His expression betrayed nothing, but Kate caught the subtle assessment in his eyes. The reevaluation of someone previously invisible who had suddenly become a person of interest. Sullivan's office embodied military precision. Awards and commendations hung in perfectly aligned rows on the wall behind his desk. His surface held only essential items: a computer terminal, a single folder, a phone, and a ceremonial seal knife mounted on a wooden base, its blade catching the morning light. No personal photographs, no mementos, nothing to humanize a space. The colonel himself stood at the window back to the door, hands clasped behind him, in textbook military posture. He didn't turn when Kate entered. "Shut the door," he said, his voice cool and controlled. Kate complied, then moved to the center of the room, stopping at precisely the distance regulation dictated for a subordinate addressing a commanding officer. She didn't sit, he hadn't offered, and she wouldn't assume. Sullivan turned slowly, studying her with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing a potential threat. At 55, he remained physically imposing, the build of a man who had never allowed himself to soften after leaving Special Forces. His salt and pepper hair was cut regulation short, his uniform pressed to perfection. "Your personnel file makes for interesting reading, Ms. Marshall," he said, moving to his desk and opening the folder there. 20 years in naval administration. Competent but unremarkable evaluations. No specialized training beyond basic logistics systems. He looked up, eyes cold. "Nothing that would explain your performance last night." Kate remained silent. Any response would reveal more than she wanted. Sullivan's mouth tightened at her silence. "You demonstrated knowledge of communication systems and emergency protocols far beyond your clearance level. You issued orders in my command with no authority to do so. And most interestingly," he leaned forward slightly, "you used specific phraseology and command tone consistent with flag officer training." Kate met his gaze evenly. "The situation required immediate action, sir. I have some experience with emergency protocols from previous assignments." "Experience," Sullivan repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "Last night you didn't function like an experienced administrator. You functioned like someone accustomed to command." He circled the desk, moving closer, using his height as intimidation. "Who are you really, Ms. Marshall?" "Exactly who my file says I am, Colonel." Sullivan's laugh held no humor. "Let's test that theory, shall we? This morning I had an interesting conversation with Naval Intelligence about unscheduled personnel transfers to my base. Imagine my surprise when they confirmed no Catherine Marshall was officially processed through Norfolk in the past month." Kate's expression remained neutral, but her mind accelerated through contingencies. Sullivan had moved faster than expected, likely alerted by her actions the previous night. The question was whether he was simply suspicious or had uncovered her actual identity. "I don't know what to tell you about administrative processing errors, sir," she replied. Sullivan stepped closer, invading her personal space in a deliberate intimidation tactic. "I think you do. I think you'll tell me exactly who sent you and why. Because right now you're looking at charges of falsifying military credentials, infiltrating a secure installation, and interfering with command protocols during an emergency situation." Before Kate could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. The door opened without waiting for Sullivan's acknowledgement, revealing Major Carter, her expression tightly controlled. "Colonel, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent situation at the supply depot. Captain Peterson is requesting your immediate presence." Sullivan's jaw tightened at the interruption. "This will have to wait, Major." Sir, he was quite insistent. It concerns last night's shipment and the special inventory items. Something passed between them, an understanding that Kate wasn't meant to catch, but did. Sullivan's expression shifted, subtly, concern breaking through his controlled facade. "We'll continue this discussion later, Ms. Marshall," he said, his tone making it clear this was far from over. "Report to Major Carter's office and remain there until I return." After Sullivan departed, Carter closed the door and turned to Kate, her expression unreadable. "Walk with me," she said simply. They moved through the corridors in silence, but instead of heading toward the logistics office, Carter led them toward the rear exit of the building. Once outside, she spoke in a low voice. "I don't know who you really are, but Sullivan ordered security to detain you after your meeting. He's convinced you're either naval intelligence or NCs." Kate studied Carter's face, searching for motivation. "Why are you telling me this?" Carter's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing frustration and something like hope. "Because in 3 weeks you've done more to help my people than anyone in the past year. And because I watched you save that aircraft last night when everyone else was paralyzed." They walked along the edge of a service road, away from security cameras and potential listeners. The morning air carried the clean scent of aftermath, the particular freshness that follows violent weather. "Sullivan and Peterson are moving something from last night's shipment," Carter continued. "Something that wasn't on the manifest but came in a specialized container. They're transferring it to a civilian vehicle in less than an hour." "How do you know this?" "Because they needed authorization codes I control. I've delayed them with a systems issue, but that won't hold for long." Carter stopped, turning to face Kate directly. "I don't care if you're intelligence or inspector general, but if you're investigating what I think you are, you need to move now." Kate weighed her options quickly. Carter was offering an opportunity, but it required trust, a commodity in short supply at Seahawk Point. "I need access to the old storage facility on the north perimeter," Kate said. "And I need to contact Staff Sergeant Cole and First Sergeant Wilson." Carter nodded without hesitation. "I can get you there. Cole and Wilson were already asking about you this morning." 20 minutes later, Kate stood with Carter, Cole, and Wilson in the shadow of Warehouse 7, a relic from Seahawk Point's Cold War heyday. The massive structure had once housed sensitive equipment destined for submarine deployment. Now, according to official records, it contained only outdated materials awaiting disposal. "This facility doesn't appear on current base maps," Kate explained, "but it's still connected to the original power grid and has dedicated communication lines that bypass the main switchboard." Cole's weathered face showed grudging admiration. "How the hell do you know that those lines were decommissioned in '89? "They were officially decommissioned," Kate corrected, "but they were actually hardened and maintained as backup systems for covert operations. The question is whether Sullivan knows about them." Wilson frowned. "Based on the communications traffic I've been monitoring, I'd say he does. We've picked up unauthorized transmissions from this sector for months, but every time I file a report, it disappears into administrative black holes." "What exactly are we looking for?" Carter asked. Kate didn't immediately answer. Instead, she studied the 3 people before her. Career military professionals who had spent years fighting a losing battle against institutional corruption. They had risked their careers by joining her here. They deserved more than partial truths. "I believe Sullivan is using Seahawk Point as a distribution hub for stolen military hardware," she said finally. "High-value electronic components, weapon systems, classified communication equipment. The kind of material that would be worth millions to foreign military or intelligence services." Cole swore under his breath. "That explains why my vehicles never get the parts they need. They're being diverted before they reach us." "But this isn't just about missing parts," Kate continued. "Last night's shipment contained something significant enough to accelerate their timeline, something worth risking exposure for." Wilson's expression darkened. "The secure communication module. It was a last-minute addition to the manifest. A next-generation encryption system for fleet-wide deployment. Only 3 exist outside of R&D. The implications hung heavily in the air. Such technology in the wrong hands could compromise naval communications across multiple theaters of operation, endangering thousands of lives and countless operations. "We need to move," Kate said. "Sullivan will have security teams searching for me by now." The warehouse interior was cavernous and dim, emergency lighting casting long shadows across abandoned equipment and storage containers. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as Kate led them toward the rear of the facility. "There," Wilson whispered, pointing to a section where modern equipment stood in stark contrast to the aging surroundings. "That's our hardware, signal boosters, frequency modulators, directional antennas. They've built a ghost communication center. Kate studied the setup with professional assessment. Not just for communication, this is a staging area for verification and testing. They're ensuring the stolen technology functions before delivery. A sound from the front of the warehouse froze them in place. The metallic groan of the main doors opening, followed by the rumble of a vehicle engine. Quickly, they ducked behind a row of storage containers. Through a narrow gap, Kate watched as a civilian truck backed into the loading bay. Sullivan emerged from the passenger side, followed by Captain Peterson and two armed men in civilian clothes. They moved with the practiced efficiency of a team that had performed this operation many times before. Peterson unlocked a secure storage unit near the communications setup, revealing a metal case approximately 3 feet long. The armed men immediately moved to secure it, transferring it to a foam-lined compartment in the truck. The encryption module, Wilson breathed. Kate's mind raced through options. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with Sullivan's security teams likely already sweeping the base for her. Her direct confrontation would be catastrophic, but allowing that technology to leave the base was unthinkable. She needed to change the parameters of the situation. Kate turned to her improvised team. I need a diversion at the main vehicle entrance, something that will force security to respond without causing actual harm. Cole nodded immediately. I've got 2 maintenance vehicles with faulty alarms. 1 remote trigger, and they'll make enough noise to draw attention. Good. Wilson, can you access the base communication system from here? The original hard lines should still run to the main switchboard. The communications sergeant studied the old junction box on the wall. It's possible. What do you need? A base-wide announcement. Emergency protocol override. I'll give you the text when we're ready. Kate turned to Carter. I need you to return to headquarters immediately. Sullivan can't know you were involved. Carter shook her head firmly. I've been looking the other way too long. I'm staying. Before Kate could respond, Sullivan's voice carried clearly across the warehouse. He was on his satellite phone, speaking with cold precision. Confirmation received. Package secured and en route. Delivery at the designated coordinates in 90 minutes. It was time. Kate straightened, her decision made. She removed the chain from around her neck, extracting her actual military ID. When I give the signal, she told her team, I need you to be ready to move. What happens next will seem impossible, but I need your trust. Without waiting for their response, Kate stepped out from behind the container and walked calmly towards Sullivan and his team. Her posture changed subtly, shoulders squared, chin lifted, stride lengthening into the unmistakable gait of command. Colonel Sullivan, she called, her voice carrying the full authority of her rank. Sullivan spun, hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Recognition, then confusion, then fury crossed his face in rapid succession. Marshal, what the hell are you doing here? He nodded to his men, who immediately drew their weapons. You've made a serious mistake. Kate continued her approach, unperturbed by the firearms trained on her. No, Colonel, you've made the mistake. She stopped at a precise distance, the same professional spacing she had maintained in his office, but now with an entirely different meaning. I am Rear Admiral Catherine Harrington, and you are relieved of command, effective immediately. Sullivan's expression froze between disbelief and rage. That's absurd. You're an administrative clerk, a fantasist who's about to be arrested for espionage. Kate held up her military ID, its gold insignia catching the dim light. I am the incoming commander of Seahawk Point Naval Station, conducting a covert operational assessment prior to assuming command. And you, Colonel, are in the process of committing high treason against the United States. For a critical moment, no one moved. Sullivan's men looked to him for direction, uncertain in the face of Kate's absolute confidence. Peterson took an involuntary step backward, his face draining of color. Sullivan recovered quickly, his laugh sharp and dismissive. A convenient story, but even if you were who you claim, you have no authority here yet, and no evidence of any wrongdoing. He gestured to his armed men. Detain her. As the men moved forward, Kate gave a slight nod toward the shadows where her team waited. Instantly, Cole triggered the remote detonator. From outside, the wail of vehicle alarms erupted, followed by the base-wide announcement system crackling to life. Attention all personnel, this is a security alert. Implement lockdown protocol Eagle 7. Repeat Eagle 7. It was a specific code, one that Wilson had recognized when Kate whispered it to him. The highest level security protocol used only in cases of confirmed infiltration or attack. All gates would lock. All security teams would deploy to predetermined positions. All movement on the base would freeze. In the momentary confusion, Kate pressed her advantage. Eagle 7 protocol requires immediate security team deployment to all command facilities. In approximately 45 seconds, this warehouse will be surrounded by armed Marines who will secure everyone present until command authority can be established. Sullivan's expression hardened as he realized the trap closing around him. You're bluffing. Even if you are who you claim to be, you have no proof of anything illegal. I don't need proof for an Eagle 7 protocol, Kate replied evenly. But as for evidence, she gestured to the truck where the secure case had been loaded. That encryption module was never authorized for removal from naval custody. Its serial number is logged in 3 separate secure systems, and its current location is being tracked by Naval Intelligence Satellite. This last part was a calculated bluff. The module wasn't being tracked, though it would be once Kate could secure communications. But Sullivan couldn't know that. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles confirmed the security response. Sullivan's men exchanged nervous glances, their weapons wavering. "Stand down," Kate ordered them directly, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "You're facing treason charges if you continue to follow illegal orders. Or you can cooperate with the official investigation and receive consideration." One of the men lowered his weapon slightly, uncertainty clear on his face. Sullivan saw his control slipping. With sudden violence, he drew his own sidearm, aiming directly at Kate. "You've overplayed your hand, whoever you are. No admiral conducts covert assessments personally. You're some kind of intelligence plant, and when you disappear, it will be written off as an operational necessity." Kate didn't flinch. "Colonel Victor Sullivan, under the authority vested in me by the United States Navy, you are hereby relieved of command and placed under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and attempted theft of classified military technology." The warehouse doors crashed open as the Marine security team entered, weapons ready. They halted in confusion at the tableau before them. Armed civilians, their commanding officer with weapon drawn, and an unfamiliar woman in civilian clothes standing calmly at the center of the confrontation. In that moment of uncertainty, Sullivan made his decision. He shifted his aim from Kate to the Marines, creating a split-second distraction, then lunged for the truck. Kate moved with the fluid precision of someone who had trained for combat situations throughout her career. She closed the distance to Sullivan in 3 rapid strides, deflecting his weapon arm with a practiced strike, then using his own momentum to unbalance him. His weapon clattered to the floor as she drove him against the truck's side panel, securing his arm in a joint lock that immobilized him without permanent injury. "I wasn't always behind a desk, Colonel," she said quietly, maintaining the hold, as the Marines rushed forward to secure the scene. "I earned my rank the same way you earned yours, in service and sacrifice. The difference is I never forgot whom I serve." As the Marines took Sullivan and his men into custody, Kate straightened her clothing and turned to the confused security team leader. "Lieutenant, I am Rear Admiral Catherine Harrington, incoming commander of Seahawk Point. I need this warehouse secured as a crime scene and all personnel present detained for questioning. Contact Naval Intelligence and inform them we have recovered stolen classified technology and apprehended the responsible parties." The young officer hesitated only briefly before recognition dawned in his eyes. He had likely seen her official photo in the command briefing materials. "Yes, Admiral," he replied, saluting sharply. From the shadows, Carter, Cole, and Wilson emerged, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Kate acknowledged them with a nod of respect. "I'll need statements from all 3 of you," she said, "but first ensure that encryption module is secured. It never leaves official custody." As the Marines established a security perimeter, Kate stepped away to make a secure call to Admiral Whitmore. The older admiral answered immediately. "It's done," she reported. "Sullivan is in custody. We've recovered the encryption module and secured their distribution center." "Any complications?" Whitmore asked. Kate glanced at Sullivan as he was led to a security vehicle, his expression a mask of cold fury. "Nothing unexpected. Sullivan was exactly what we suspected, the visible part of a larger operation. He claims to have protection from higher up. That's why we needed this operation to be completely compartmentalized," Whitmore replied. "The corruption extends further than Seahawk Point. Sullivan is going to discover his protection has suddenly evaporated." "What about the base?" Kate asked. The official change of command ceremony was scheduled for next week. "Considering the circumstances, I believe we should accelerate that timeline. Effective immediately, Rear Admiral Seahawk Point is yours." The weight of command settled on Kate's shoulders, a familiar burden but different this time. For weeks, she had walked among the people of this base, seen their struggles, witnessed their resilience, despite the corruption eroding their foundation. She had experienced Seahawk Point not as an admiral reviewing reports, but as someone embedded in its daily reality. "I'll need a full naval intelligence team," she said. "Sullivan's operation was too sophisticated to be isolated. We need to trace every connection." "Already inbound," Whitmore confirmed. "And Kate, well done." By midday, word had spread throughout Seahawk Point. The mysterious administrative specialist was actually their new commanding officer. The deputy commander had been arrested for treason. The base was now under direct naval intelligence oversight as evidence was gathered and systems secured. Kate stood at the window of what was now officially her office, watching the controlled chaos below as investigative teams moved between buildings. She had changed into her formal uniform, the admiral's stars on her shoulders catching the light as she turned. A knock at the door announced Major Carter, who entered with a stack of preliminary reports. She saluted crisply, her demeanor professional, but with a new undertone of respect that went beyond rank. "The initial security sweep is complete, Admiral," she reported. "We've identified 3 additional personnel who appear to have been involved in Sullivan's operation. They're being detained for questioning." "Thank you, Major," Kate replied, accepting the reports. "And the encryption module? Secured and verified intact. Naval intelligence has confirmed it wasn't compromised." Kate nodded, relieved that the most critical damage had been prevented. "I'll need you to coordinate with department heads for a full staff meeting at 1600. It's time everyone understood exactly what's happening to their base." "Yes, ma'am." Carter hesitated, then added, "Permission to speak freely, Admiral." "Always, Major." "When you were working in logistics, was any of it real? The help you gave the systems, you fixed the people you listened to." Kate smiled slightly. "All of it was real, Major. The best way to understand a command is to experience it from the inside out. I learned more in 3 weeks at that desk than I would have in a year of formal briefings." Carter nodded, accepting this. "The base is talking, ma'am, about how you worked alongside them without rank or privilege. It's unusual. Sometimes leadership requires stepping away from authority to see the truth," Kate replied. "Sullivan was able to maintain his operation because he created distance between himself and the reality of this base. I needed to eliminate that distance." "Will you be implementing Admiral Whitmore's new assessment protocols across the fleet?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "You've been well briefed, Major." "I've had conversations with naval intelligence for the past 3 hours," Carter replied with a hint of dry humor. "They're quite thorough." "The protocol is still experimental," Kate acknowledged. "But yes, I believe there's value in leadership experiencing command from multiple perspectives." As Carter departed, Kate turned back to the window. Below, she could see Staff Sergeant Cole directing his maintenance team as they conducted inspections of the security vehicles. Even from a distance, she could see the renewed purpose in his movements, the pride that had been missing during her first days on base. At the communications center, Wilson was working with naval intelligence technicians, methodically tracing every unauthorized transmission Sullivan had sent over the past year. The investigation would likely reveal connections to foreign intelligence services and black market arms dealers, a network that reached far beyond one corrupt officer. Kate's reflection in the glass showed not just the admiral she had become, but shadows of the journey that had brought her here. The young ensign determined to prove herself in a male-dominated service. The lieutenant who had learned command during Gulf War deployments. The commander who had lost sailors under her authority and carried those names with her always. The weight of command was substantial, but it was a weight she had earned the right to bear, not just through rank and achievement, but through understanding, the kind of understanding that could only come from seeing a command through the eyes of those who served within it. A second knock at the door interrupted her reflection. This time it was Lieutenant Commander Reynolds from Naval Intelligence, his expression grave. "Admiral, we've completed the preliminary analysis of Sullivan's communications," he reported. "There's something you need to see." He handed her a data tablet displaying intercepted messages. As Kate scrolled through them, her expression hardened. Sullivan's network extended further than they had anticipated, reaching into procurement divisions at the Pentagon itself. "This is why Admiral Whitmore insisted on complete operational security for your assessment," Reynolds explained. "Sullivan had contacts who would have warned him if there had been any official investigation." Kate nodded, the full scope of the corruption becoming clear. "Coordinate with Whitmore's staff. We'll need to expand the investigation beyond Seahawk Point." As Reynolds departed, Kate returned to the window. The base continued its activities below personnel, moving with renewed purpose now that the cancer at its center had been removed. But the operation wasn't truly complete. It had only revealed how deep the corruption reached. She thought of the 14 sailors lost in the Persian Gulf, their lives potentially sacrificed because critical intelligence had been deliberately suppressed. She thought of bases like Seahawk Point, struggling under the weight of systemic failure created by those who had betrayed their oath for personal gain. This is just the beginning, she murmured to herself. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. Admiral, the department heads have assembled in the main conference room as requested. Thank you, I'm on my way. Kate straightened her uniform and collected her notes. It was time to address her command officially, to begin the process of rebuilding what Sullivan had nearly destroyed. As she moved through the corridors toward the conference room, personnel stopped and saluted, their expressions showing a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and cautious hope. The real work of command was just beginning. Seahawk Point would become a model of what naval installations could be when led with integrity and genuine understanding. And Catherine Harrington, who had walked its grounds as an anonymous clerk before claiming her rightful authority, would ensure that the lesson of her unorthodox approach would reshape leadership throughout the fleet. The fleet, after all, was only as strong as its most vulnerable point, and she had found that vulnerability not through reports and inspections, but by experiencing it herself, by becoming for a time invisible to the very power structure she was meant to lead. As she approached the conference room doors, Kate allowed herself a moment of reflection. In 3 weeks as Kate Marshall, she had learned more about true leadership than in years of formal command training. Sometimes she realized the best way to lead was first to follow, to understand the reality of those who would ultimately look to you for direction. With that knowledge firmly in mind, Rear Admiral Catherine Harrington stepped forward to address her command for the first time, not as an outsider assuming authority, but as someone who had already walked in their shoes and earned the right to lead them.